an almost full component of councillors with us. Councillor Patterson may be arriving a little bit late. The meeting is still going. And the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Gates, is in virtual attendance. So we just need the committee to pass a motion in that regards. So I move that Councillor Gates be permitted to attend the meeting by audio-visual link, and Councillor McDonald has seconded that. And all in favour? Everybody's happy for that to happen? Congratulations.
What's the ruling? Should I not vote?
Well, you can't vote. You can't vote. You can vote now, but you can't vote on that.
Why?
Because you're not in the room to vote.
I'm here though, look.
Yeah, but you're here now that you're permitted to be here. Prior to that, you're not permitted to be here. How come I'm the one? How come I'm the one that has to tell the councillor Gates she can't vote? That's really unfair. You can vote now, right?
But why don't we have to do that when Councillor Lacastra's been zooming in?
Because Councillor Lacastra has been zooming in for COVID-related reasons, whereas you are not.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And that's the advice from the City Solicitor. So the good news is if somebody would like to move the confirmation of minutes, move Councillor Gates, seconded Councillor Young. Thank you. All in favour? Carried. 4, I'm not aware of any conflict of interest declarations. Councillors, we have several starred items at the moment. I would like to unstar 6.4 and 7.1. Is anybody else interested in unstarring anything? Excellent. Councillor Ryan Barlin-Lumsden, would you like to move the starred items? It's a good choice. And seconded by Councillor Hamill. All in favour? Thank you. So that's 5.1, 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, and that leaves us with 6.4, which is the live streaming of the minutes. The meetings, thank you. Councillors, are there any questions in regards to 6.4? Councillor Gates.
Thank you, Chairman. Happy to see this report come back. Initially, I always had concerns about the cost on the operational expenses that are involved. And just a question through you, I had a discussion with the Mayor about this, and we wondered why it's not possible for someone in the meeting, for example, the person that sits beside the minute taker, or the Mayor suggested even himself, to press the on and off button for streaming. So if I could just understand why it's necessary to employ someone.
Who would like to answer that? Ross, would you? Joe's going to have a crack at that.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, so I have broached this with each director, and generally I think the feedback is that while some meetings are obviously very straightforward, some are busy enough that they believe that that would be another onus on the committee secretary or whoever's sitting beside them. So then I took that view and wrote this report accordingly.
So Councillor Gates.
Did anyone discuss with the Mayor whether he had a willingness to do it? Because he did suggest that to me, that he has the controls there, that he can mute anyone and he wouldn't mind doing that.
I've seen him do it, Councillor Gates.
We're really talking committee meetings. I haven't spoken to the Mayor about it.
So Councillor Gates, I had proposed, or I wanted to propose, a slight change to the recommendation, which I think maybe picks up on some of the things that you've just talked about, and that's the Chief Executive Officer Coordinator's standard set of procedures in regards to the streaming of the standing committees. The standing committee meetings. I think that just might actually cut through some of that. So, because ultimately, to me, it's a function of how the chamber should operate and how it should operate consistently. And if the CEO is able to create those procedures, all of the directorates will then follow through on what's been arranged. So, and that might provide the ability to streamline some of that stuff.
Okay, that would be all encompassing too. The only other question that I have, if it's okay for me to ask another question. Sorry, I can't see who else might have their hand up.
So Councillor Hamill has his hand up, but he has asked if you can speak first.
Okay. I just wondered, in the list of attendees or virtual people watching the live streaming, have we done a breakdown of how many people are external to council and how many are internal that are actually watching the live streaming?
Mr. Chairman, no, we haven't. I don't believe that's technically possible at this point in time, so that's why we haven't done it. I mean, we can put in place some advice to the staff in terms of, you know, watching. Obviously, we don't want staff sitting there all day watching council meetings or committees.
Or the replays.
Some would be appropriate in terms of if they're watching.
So maybe that can be encompassed in your
and your set procedures.
Yeah, I'll take that on board. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's all for me.
Councillor Hamill.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, it was because I saw the extra wording coming up and was looking for an explanation of what that might entail, because I thought it was picking up on Councillor Gates' question as well. So I'm fine for now.
So I'm happy to move the item. If anybody would like to second it. Seconded, Councillor McDonald. Yeah, who's not in favour of transparency? So I actually think that it's a useful thing for the city, and I think on page 49, it's clear that there are actually a number of replays as well, and in particular, I think that there are some standing committees that definitely benefit from both residents and professionals being able to go back and look to see what was said. I think everybody would appreciate planning and environment is definitely one of those where we have inevitably a cast of thousands in regards to consultants, and it's important that they actually have the ability to, I think, to look in to see what the representatives have said in regards to particular projects, and I think that may help clarify some questions that they have from time to time. So would anybody like to speak against it? Okay, I've just closed. All in favour? So carried unanimously. 7.1. So I have a question, but I don't think we need to go to close because I think it can probably be answered separately. So the papers are currently confidential. The recommendation would seek to have some of them made non-confidential at the discretion of the CEO. On pages 55 through to 58, there's a summary of a lot of small items and some larger items, but which is the unrecoverable write-offs. I was just interested in whether or not the city has a set amount that could deal with some of the smaller items and without it necessarily needing to be a decision of council. Paul?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, there is no process at the moment for the thresholds. We can, however, start reporting on amounts similar to the sundry debtor schedules, which are on, just looking at a page.
So like page 53?
Page 53, that's the one, yeah. So what we could do is create segmented levels and say anything over $100, $1,000, for example, could be reported as a whole total, and then we could detail all of those over that amount.
Yeah, so I don't know what the other councillors think, but I think that it's actually a pretty large use of resources to have a table that puts in amounts of 70 cents and 2 cents and $9, etc. So I'd be very comfortable with those not necessarily needing to be reported, and I'm happy for that amount to be around that 100 or 250. Councillor Gates?
Thanks, Chairman. I just had a question too, and I don't believe it's got any confidentiality. And it was just about how the officers tried to retrieve these funds. Well, there was mention of a personal contact campaign. Did that involve telephoning all of the debtors?
So is this in regards to the unrecoverable write-offs?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll have Lee Jackson talk to that on our behalf, Councillor.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Councillor Gates, we do have a personal contact campaign that does involve contact with the individuals once we exhausted a reminder notice and a final notice. We then go through I suppose the first contact is via a text to ask the debtor to contact council. If that is unsuccessful, we then actually attempt to make phone contact with them personally and try to negotiate a settlement of the debt. At the moment, that happens for the rates and water accounts, not so for the sundry debts.
Okay. And so would it help if that started happening for the larger sundry debts? So again, getting back to the original point, it makes no sense to make a call for chasing 10 cents, but it does make sense to at least have reached out for a $400 account.
Correct. The more physical contact we can have with the debtor, the more likely we are to recover the debt.
Yeah. So
I guess my concern was when you go through the list and you see some companies that are still operational and sometimes involved in work associated with council, and yet they have a debt of $3 that they haven't paid, which I really don't understand why that can't be paid.
I'd need to ask Nifson that question.
Mm.
It is a fair comment, though, that it does appear uneconomical to pursue in some cases where there are a trading and ongoing entity. It would not be much work to actually try to consolidate it with any other outstanding debts that are in place.
Okay, thank you.
So I have Councillor Taylor and then Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, and I think I'm just reinforcing the cost to actually chase some of these debts up, and what type of, do we have a threshold of value that it reaches where we actually then don't follow the process of chasing that money up? Because my concern would be the cost to chase a value up is a lot greater than what's actually there at the moment, one in resources and cost as well. So do we have a threshold that at some point it's cheaper to let it go?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we do not have a threshold per se, although our rates and water debts in the overwhelming majority of instances are secured. So the smallest amounts will just sit on the rate or the water account. For our sundry debtors, where it's not traditionally an ongoing account, we then do need to make a case-by-case assessment, which normally goes back to the originating part of the business as to how far they'd like to pursue the matter. But normally we would attempt to be practical on these ones, and if it's, say a matter of $5, we would set the threshold of not send recovery notices out for $5 or below.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. I would be curious to understand what our cost is to recover funds, whether it's $10 or 100,000. What the process would be, so that we could actually try and minimise that cost where appropriately. And then obviously I'm comfortable with a value of say $250. But if the reporting could give us an indication of how many of those debtors were part of the total amount, and an average cost would be great.
Yep. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to bring back a report to that essence, noting obviously there's a traditional split between our sundry debtors and our rate/water debtors.
Thank you. Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I was going to ask the same question about the cost, per chasing up on these. I mean, when you've got a 2-cent debt, obviously it's not worth council chasing them. It's a bit ridiculous. But I also would like to know what the cost is, postage, phone call, officer time, to chase a debt, and then we can reach an amount that we can look at.
Yep, through you, Mr. Chair, again, that report should helpfully identify those sort of cost levels, I suppose, the threshold or the break-even points when it makes sense to pursue. The challenge, I suppose, the other side of the coin for that is, whilst we try to do things economically viable, the fact that we are dealing with public monies, I suppose, is almost a counterweight to that.
Yep. Councillor Hamill.
Mr. Chair, my question's in regards to the rather significant amount of these that are for roadside dining. Would most of the entities that are listed in those tables, and I won't name any because they're confidential, but they're obviously, are they owners of those premises or are they tenants of those premises? Most likely.
Through you, Mr. Chair, those ones would be the business, so the occupier, not
Yeah,
necessarily the owner.
Most likely a tenant.
So, Mr. Chairman, just looking at the amounts of them and the fact that a lot of those entities have multiple amounts owing for other parts as well, I'm guessing that's the fact that most likely their business, they've pulled the pin on their business, and that was probably what the last 3 months worth of roadside dining fees or other fees was worth, Lee? Would I be somewhere on the path there?
Through you, Mr. Chair, without knowing exactly the detail of each case, I think that's a fair assumption.
Yeah. Have we ever looked at, Mr. Chair, or had consideration to if there was other ways to approach that? If maybe we could have a bond in place, for example, or that a new business entering into a precinct where there's a roadside dining fee has to prepay maybe the first 3 months or first month, so that we've got that security in place.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there hasn't been that thought, but that certainly would be a way to secure council's position to a greater extent.
Mr. Chair, probably that maybe to Joe that was there. Joe, would there be any interest in looking at that, or what would you need to investigate that?
So the question really was some type of bond for roadside dining to help reduce the number of sundry debtors from businesses.
Yep. Do you need any wording to it? Are you happy just to look at that? Yep. Just look at that. 'Cause a lot of them, Mr. Chair, are relatively, although some of them are getting up there a little bit, but there's a lot of them that I reckon once they were accumulated together, it adds up to a fair chunk of what's in these tables. And if perhaps there's a way that through a bond being paid beforehand, that we have security over that and they just can't close the doors in the business and then leave and owe us a month's worth of roadside dining fees, etc.
We'll take that on notice and we'll have a look at that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So I'm going to go to Councillor Young, then Councillor Taylor, and then Councillor Gates.
And through the chair, and just along the same vein as Councillor Hamill there, with these, the roadside dining ones there, and some of them are substantial. Now, part of that was our COVID-19 recovery where we had a lot of that on hold. So have these been accumulated prior to 2019?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the only suspension of recovery action was for new debt accumulated past 30th of June 21. So there's a fair chance that some of these could just solely be that period. They could also be some form of accumulation. Again, that's got to a point, but it's now reached the decision was at the time to recommend the write-off of these rather than pursue recovery action. Because for a lot of these, we need to be aware that whilst it's a debt for a licence, the actual offence is the breach of the bylaw. So we'd be prosecuting for that, not for non-payment of the licence fee.
Okay, so more so the breach of the bylaw is what we're looking at with a lot of that, especially the roadside dining.
And through you, Mr. Chair, again, that's a different kettle of fish in terms of court action than it is for a debt recovery action.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, and I think through the chair, this leads to a similar question of that time frame of some of these debts. Totally supportive of some sort of bond for some of these organisations. Do we have, with some of these debts, obviously they've got a month-to-month fee. Do we have a time frame that we then stop the outdoor dining if they're not paying within a certain period of time? What type of leeway is given to the businesses before we decide to stop giving the rights for using the outdoor dining?
Through you, Mr. Chair, invoices issue allow a 14-day period for payment. Usually there's a 7-day tolerance period so that we're not jumping on someone prematurely to allow just a tardy payer. Then there's a reminder notice that goes out again and granting another 7 days to pay after that's issued. And then when we get to a point of time where we exhaust the debt recovery action, the matter's referred back to the business to see what action they would like us to take at that point in time. So I would hesitate to think in the last up until 31st of January, when the recovery suspension of 7 months finished. There's been limited action, if at all, before that. Again, I probably need to consult with L&C, I suppose, on what happened prior to that.
Councillor Taylor.
So I suppose my still question is there a time frame, our process of going through that, how many additional months in some of these outstanding debts could be additional invoices going out while they're trading, while we're going through our whole process? Is it 30, 60, 90?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there'd be varying amounts on varying properties for those ones, so I don't have an accurate answer that one size fits all, I'm sorry, but we can investigate that.
Yeah, and an understanding of where we actually, I know we've got a process, but do we have a time frame where we say if you're not paid within 30 days, there's still a process, but we don't continue to invoice out and give them that right? So thank you.
Welcome, Councillor Patterson. So just to bring you up to speed, we have dealt with everything other than 7.1, which we're on at the moment, and 7.2, which we're coming to, and we're in open, not closed. So I think I was Councillor Gates.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a question about the roadside dining payments. Are they possibly COVID related? I mean, I would be myself a little bit worried about investigating a bond on restaurants at this point in time, when everyone's still just coming out of what's been a really difficult time. And is it a possibility that these places have closed because of COVID, which has meant that there's more debt than would normally be the case for this activity?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that's a very fair assessment. I don't have the information, Councillor, in front of me to confirm or deny that, but I think that would not be unreasonable to expect that whilst we suspended recovery action for that last 7 months up until the end of January, that the accumulation of debts from when COVID hit, starting March 20, has really knocked that sector significantly.
So it's been an extraordinary period, and I would really think twice. I know that Mr. McCabe took it on notice, but I think we really do need to give consideration to the difficult time that restaurants and many other businesses on the Gold Coast have had due to border closures and the fact that many people are still staying home because of the fear of COVID. So just as long as that can be borne in mind when we consider hitting them with another fee.
Councillor Hamill.
Mr. Chair, I think Councillor Gates would be well and truly aware we can't apply a bond to someone that's already in place, so it could only apply to new businesses or new entries coming in. And out of the $112,000 owing to the city, 30,000 of it is roadside dining. So appreciate her comments, but I think looking at it, I haven't mentioned any names. I think the figures are fine. It's worth looking at, but that can be considered as part of it. And since I've got the mic on, can I ask another question?
You could, if you hadn't have been waiting for Councillor Ryan Baldwin-Lumsden to ask his question. He yields the floor to you, Councillor Baldwin-Lumsden.
Very generous, thank you. One was similar note, but just on the venue hire. My question, Mr. Chair, was just what have we got in place, particularly on page 58? Some of those amounts are quite large. Surely if people are ongoing hiring venues and halls and things and not paying, should spark interest as to... Because just two of them on this page accounts for about 10% of the total debt Councillor Hamill mentioned. And I wouldn't have thought those amounts were one-off days. I would have thought those were ongoing venue hire charges.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I don't know the details, Councillor, but we will investigate those ones. The process around sundry debtor accounts normally involves most of the accounts. We would do a credit analysis on the customer applying for it. We would go through and do the usual checks that you do in those ones to find out if they are worthy of the supply of credit or not. Where they're not, it's obviously a cash account and it's pay up front.
Councillor Baldwin-Lumsden.
So, for our venues, who's responsible for the payment for the use of venues? Is that the venue coordinators, or is that solely revenue services, or
The venue coordinators would instruct revenue services to issue an invoice, and we would raise the invoice, provide the billing and the collection service for them. And also we would provide advice as to the credit worthiness. It doesn't mean that they have to accept that advice.
Yep. Councillor Hamill?
Mr. Chairman, the second biggest amount of money owing is in regards to standpipe and bulk water owing, totalling around $25,000 out of the total amount. Noting that the reason given why we can't pursue it in most cases is because the company's been deregistered. Again, I'd wonder if, in those particular circumstances, looking at the kind of values that they run up in debt pretty quick of why a personal bond on a director of those companies couldn't be requested when they get standpipe hire in the first place. I note from seeing these reports over the last couple of years that it always pops up and it's always those kind of amounts showing in there. So again, it can be taken on notice by Joe that I think looking at personal bonds on directors of companies when they apply for standpipe hire from the city wouldn't be unreasonable to stop these kind of amounts popping in there.
Through you, Mr. Chair, fair comment. Noting, of course, that the personal guarantees of directors come with their own set of challenges, and whether there's insolvencies at the corporate level, sometimes they flow on to the personal level from related entities, but I think it would minimise the risk to council for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with regards to the standpipe, we could actually just partly bond the issuing of a licence to have a standpipe and disconnect it from the personal guarantees. So my guess is, like, if there's 30 of them in the city being used and their average invoice is $3,000 or something like that, you could easily have a $1,000 bond up front. So maybe that's something for revenue services to take up with the directorate as to whether or not, because my recollection of the standpipes is there's actually not a lot that have been issued and are able to be used. So that might be something for Gold Coast Waste and Water to have a look at.
That's my understanding as well, noting they already do commit to a bond for the safe return of the standpipe.
Yep.
We could certainly look at the value of that bond to factor in some component to secure the debt as well.
And would that turn up in our annual budget fees and charges?
That would be a bond, so it would be refundable money, so it's not net revenue.
Right, okay.
If they do the right thing.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. And through the chair, any of these outstanding funds, are any of these companies in administration, or are they still in a process of some sort of recovery through a wind up, or are we just right?
So I think Councillor Taylor on the third column, it talks about where it's unrecoverable because company deregistered. So I think where they've reached that point, there is no point in pursuing it because they've been deregistered.
And through you, Mr. Chair, that could also be a forced deregistration, so a liquidation, or another type of external administration. It could well be that they just haven't lodged documentation and ASIC has taken upon themselves to deregister the company, but it no longer makes them a legal entity, so we can no longer enforce remedy through the courts.
Councillors, are there any other questions? Councillor Hamill?
Final one, Mr. Chairman. There's just a couple of ones in here that I haven't seen on previous reports of this nature. So one of them on page 58 refers to a relocation of stormwater gully. And then there's a couple on page 57 about plans and applications and whatnot, about half at the top of the page, which they're quite significant amounts. I was just wondering if Lee could give a bit more detail on what they might actually involve. Are they where the city has entered into a debt arrangement with these businesses to undertake works for them and they just haven't made payments?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just looking at the couple on page 57, noting, of course, we're in close, or it's unconfidential, that, again, the company has been deregistered. So for those particular ones, the detail of the debt surrounding them, Councillor, I'd need to investigate and take that on notice and come back to you.
I wouldn't mind that, just noting that they're big numbers and just what that actually entails and those couple of things. And the same on page 58 with relocation of stormwater gully. So how that came about and what the payment arrangements were. or what actual contract was entered into. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Would anybody like to move that item?
I'll move it, Chair.
Move Councillor Young, seconded Councillor Gates. All in favour? Carried.
Wonder Reef.
Councillors, that leaves us with 7.2, the Wonder Reef brand report. Does anybody have any questions or any need to go into closed in this regards?
Not me.
Excellent. Would anybody like to move the item? Anyone?
No one else has.
Moved Councillor Gates. Would anybody like to second it? Seconded Councillor Young. Councillor Gates, would you like to speak to Wonder Reef?
Well, yeah, it's an exciting new activity for people on the Gold Coast, a new experience that we look forward to. So it makes sense to have a brand guide so that we can start promoting it and getting people back to our beautiful city.
Excellent. I think all of the work done in regards to the brand is really good. Like, I mean, I think it's quite clear and uncluttered, and I look forward to everybody getting excited about diving for all sorts of things. Nobody wants to speak against Wonder Reef. Councillor Hamill.
Just very quickly, Mr. Chair, because it's not in the report, was this developed internally or did we go to market and get this developed?
Through the Chair, yes, it was developed internal with a lot of consultation from Corporate Comms City Reputation team. We went out to to JSA, which is a marketing company that developed it.
So there was a cost incurred to get this developed?
Yes.
Yep. Mr. Chair, can I be provided what that cost was by the by Joe at some stage?
Yeah.
Yep.
That was all.
Councillor Young.
And just in support of it, and I think it was, and through the chair, through our International Women's Day events yesterday on at lunchtime yesterday, Councillor Taylor and Councillor Patterson and myself were at the Destination Gold Coast luncheon, and we had head of tourism for Australia and Queensland and the Gold Coast, and very much the talk was for new product within the city that people will continue to support us because they've come in the past, but it is great to have new offerings coming forward, and I believe that the Wonder Reef is actually going to put us on the map with other tourism destinations when they've got something new and different to do in our city. Everybody loves to come to our city, enjoy our beaches, enjoy our hinterland, enjoy our theme parks and that, but this is just another offering that's actually going to expand the desire of people to actually keep returning to the Gold Coast and to keep enjoying our beautiful city. So very much in favour.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Gates, would you like to close?
No need, Chairman.
Excellent. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Councillors, is there any general business? Excellent. Councillor Gates, we look forward to seeing you in real life. And with that, the business of the meeting is closed at 9:45.
Thank you. And can I just thank everyone for letting me attend virtually?
I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Rubbish. Goodbye, William.